Customers want fast and frictionless digital experiences, yet also expect protection against breaches, privacy violations, and fraud. Drive engagement by optimizing security and convenience to attract and retain customers. Use the PingOne cloud platform to build, test, and optimize digital experiences. The no-code orchestration engine weaves together authentication, user management, and MFA, all of which can enhance security, drive engagement, and boost revenues. Visit securityweekly.com/ping identity to learn more. Is your team ready to defend against the latest cyber threats? Validate human cyber defense readiness with Rangeforce. Sharpen your team's capabilities with a cloud-based platform that takes a real-world, continuous approach to cybersecurity skills development. Rangeforce empowers cyber defense readiness at scale, with hundreds of interactive modules, learning paths mapped to industry frameworks, skill assessments, and team-based defensive threat exercises. Visit securityweekly.com/Rangeforce to learn more.
Attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response, and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Register at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, which include YouTube and Twitch. All right, for our second interview today, we a bit of a change of plans. Sick Codes was not able to join us today, but Tyler Robinson and myself are pretty comfortable with this topic. I spent a lot of time talking to Sick Codes and prepping for this topic, so we just decided to go on with it anyway and give you all this good information. And so the topic today, grinding tractors to a halt, was intended to be kind of a teaser for a talk that Sick Codes is doing on the main stage of DEF CON in a couple weeks. And it's really interesting. Basically, he was talking with Paul Roberts, who started the Secu Repairs group, or it's like a newsletter, where he covers right to repair and the kind of stuff that companies do to prevent people from or to force them to use the product a certain way or prevent them from circumventing things and things that people generally associate with fully owning the product. So we had an example last week that got Tyler Shields fired up with BMW heated seats that you can't use unless you pay, I think it was $18 a month or something like that, some kind of subscription fee that you have to pay. And it's just, it's maddening because you supposedly own the car. Like, this isn't a license for the car. And supposedly part of that was the cost of putting the heated seats into the car, or maybe they're subsidizing it. Maybe they're subsidizing part of the cost of the car. Maybe that's how it works. But last time I checked, cars aren't getting any cheaper, so I don't know about that. So yeah, when it comes to tractors and farmers, this kind of goes to an extreme. And Sick Codes is an Australian researcher, and he was talking to Paul Roberts, and basically Paul Roberts just pointed out the fact that there had never been any CVEs on John Deere products, and they're basically just piles of computers on wheels at this point. And there needed to be more research on them. So Sick Codes started to buy tractor parts on eBay and places like that. And yeah, it was about what you would expect from a company that's very much not a software company, not a tech company, a manufacturing company that just kind of awkwardly made the shift into highly connected devices and computers and things like that.
Not to mention that they piss off farmers a lot because of their exorbitant rates, ongoing maintenance fees, continual updates that cost a fortune. I mean, most of these tractors have been either fitted, retrofitted, or updated to do, automatic GPS driving. You have to pay per field, per module change. If you put in a new pivot line, you have to have someone come out and pay the $800 an hour to have them update the GPS mapping to change the direction on something that you own, and you can't manually override some of this stuff. So John Deere is not in a great spot with farmers, and they haven't been for a while, even outside of this. So this is kind of the next evolution of people going above and beyond to look at the vulnerabilities in order to get around those companies that are doing things like this, so that they have that right to use. And you'll be surprised how much money farmers are willing to pay so that they don't have to kind of do some of the things that they're being forced to do, because there's not a lot of options here.
Yeah, like as an example, so it's not just like forcing you to pay a subscription, and I think, I believe John Deere has gone to the extent of saying that farmers don't own the tractors, they just own a license for operating them. Yep. Because long before the mechanical end of life for these things, and these are huge industrial machines, these are not, Toyota Corollas, and those last a while, a lot of people have tractors in their family on their farm over generations, much less whatever the planned obsolescence is, for your, your modern John Deere tractor. But certainly that license is running out, long before the physical machine has given up. So, like as an example here, it's not just the subscription to use the thing, but if you reboot the computer in your tractor more than 10 times in a day or something like that, goes into recovery mode, and the only way to get it out of recovery mode is to contact the dealer. And he was saying, like where he lives, the closest dealer is 900 kilometers away. So,
they charge per mile and a service fee, and you have to have an active agreement with that John Deere dealership in order for that to be in effect. Otherwise, you pay a premium.
Yeah,
I would think that the repercussions even go beyond. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but we already have supply chain problems. The agricultural supply chain is not immune from them, even remotely. We've had so many problems. And so if we have these issues, and it's either lack of resiliency, lack of the ability, to get something fixed or remediate something quickly, this has even farther reaching effects than cybersecurity.
Yeah, and already the war in Ukraine, is likely, I don't know if we're feeling the effects of it yet, but they produce a ton of wheat. Particularly Africa is a big buyer of grain from Ukraine, and not being able to plant this season, the disruption that war is causing, could cause is projected to cause a pretty big food shortage. And these kinds of business models on top of that, are not helping. And I don't know, Tyler, if you know how much you know about the Ukrainians using different firmware or coming up with their own firmware.
Yeah, that's one of the big tractor hacks right now is certain exported firmware and certain firmware that's being reverse engineered over in Ukraine. Those have the ability to override and do things that you can do outside of the dealership. So there's a bunch of people that are importing or downloading or flashing their tractors using the Ukrainian software. And some of that's reversed, some of that's hacked or reverse engineered and put back together and compiled. Some of that is just firmware from Ukraine that doesn't have the same limitations. Why that is, I'm not 100% sure.
Right. Yeah, and he found some inconsistencies also. So he's grabbed some of these ECUs. I forget exactly what you call. There's several computers in the tractor. But the main one that allows you to operate it, that actually has remote connectivity to the John Deere Operations Center, where they can see exactly where your tractor is at all times. They can jump in and control it remotely. But he's found some inconsistency in both the protections on the devices, from the ones that he's grabbed off of eBay, and the data on them. So, again, this kind of goes back to John Deere. It's kind of like the difference between GM and Tesla. Like when somebody found a hack on Tesla, or BMW for that matter, or Audi, when there have been vulnerabilities there, they send out an OTA update, and all owners of these vehicles have the patched software running on their cars the next day. When GM had, the issue with, their cars where they're basically vulnerable and sitting on the Sprint network, the stuff that Wired and, Andy Greenberg and Charlie Miller and Velasek brought to light. They sent out flash drives, and a step-by-step instructions for car owners to upgrade the firmware and the software on their cars. So, I mean, that's kind of the difference we're talking about here. This is not a company that grew up a software company, even though they should be. Right, like they should be a lot more competent with this stuff, and they're just not. Which is one of the reasons it's important that researchers like SitCodes are focused on them.
I mean, not only that, but the right to use. Like, they're going to have to make some adoptions and changes. Like, the farmers aren't going to put up with this for that much longer. They're not necessarily a monopoly. I mean, you've got other tractors out there. You got Kubota. You got others that are doing the tractor industry, but these guys maintain a pretty good sized monopoly for specialized equipment. And you're not talking about cheap tractors. I mean, you're talking about a 5505E. Those start at like 100,000. That's one of the smallest tractors you can get. And you go up to $500,000 for something like an 8600 that's doing some hay or grain. Those are very, very expensive, and there's not a huge profit margin in farming. A lot of the farming is subsidized. They're operating off of farm loans, and the way in which farms actually make money across these through the subsidies doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room. So when companies like John Deere go in and don't allow that right to use, and they charge exorbitant rates, and you can't keep up with that, that's where I think these hacks become important in two ways. One, you've got the security of them. If you're going to run into a supply chain issue, or we go to war and they take down our ability to create food because they can hack all the John Deere tractors and mess up the GPS through ECU hacks, through vulnerabilities, that's obviously a problem. Or, infecting firmware at the supply where John Deere controls all of this and pushes out a mass update, like that's a catastrophe that could have long-standing effects. So getting the security right's one thing. Making sure that the manufacturer's held to a standard that is fair is another thing. I mean, these are using simple CAN bus. It's a standard ECU. You're working on CAN high, CAN low, interacting with something similar to like an OBD2 port. So it's not as though these are unhackable and something that you can't get into. It's just there's not a lot of people that are playing with them because these are farmers. They're not technical people, and there's not a ton of people out there doing research on it. So I think it's important from a lot of aspects.
And these devices have every wireless protocol you can imagine. Like these tractors have Wi-Fi. They've got 4G. They've got
GPS, GLONASS.
Yeah, there's a shorter range wireless protocol that is apparently pretty useful because farms are mostly flat, and there's nothing. Is it LoRa? Is that the protocol?
Yep.
Yeah,
it's very similar to LoRa. I think it is a variation of LoRa because you can do the LoRa from a high altitude, low orbit, or you can do the LoRa that is actually using GPS and grid scale. Yeah.
So some of the stuff that we're concerned with here, because I'm pretty sure in his research he was able to get access to live data, to live customer data and systems, which means you can control tractors if you can get into the John Deere Operations Center. And
does that mean there's two-way communication there?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a very interesting point.
Absolutely. I mean, he'll talk about specifically how he was able to get in. But yeah, I'm not sure if you can get back just from, any given tractor or anything like that, but it wouldn't surprise me. But
yeah, that is interesting because you have the hardware hacking side of this, right? Like you have the piece where you're interacting on that CAN, which it's a round, it's like a round OBD2 connection port, and again, it's just ground. You've got some low-high CANs, you've got an ECU, you've got some control switches for hardware. Some of this operates, via SPI. You can look at the CAN bus with an oscilloscope, or there's several devices out there now from a couple of the projects. I think Polycan was one of the big ones that was recently released. Greenboard was one. Before that, there's some Pi and Arduino setups that allow you to do some interaction and sniffing across that CAN bus. So there's a bunch of tools that you can use to interact with CAN.
Yeah, I know SitCodes was using JTagulator to do a lot of stuff with it. He recently gave a talk at Hardware, at the Hardware conference, hardware.io. And what was I going to say? So some of the things you could do with this, you could insert GPS offsets. So some of these tractors, my understanding is you can create a geofence basically for your tractor, and like they have all kinds of sensors to allow them to follow the pattern, the grooves in the ground that you have in your farm, and stay within certain GPS coordinates. You could change those, have it cross the road, pitch it into a river, have it wreck somebody else's farm, a neighbor's farm. Like
hit some power lines, a pivot line.
I mean, it's kind of that worst case scenario, that the whole Jeep Cherokee stunt, brought to light. The fact that over a just a standard consumer 4G network, they were able to control a car, shut off its engine, and tractors even more so. These things are designed to where steering, braking, accelerating, everything, all the accessories connected to the tractor, some of which are legitimately horrifying. Like you would not want some of this equipment on a rampage. Like there are some pretty destructive attachments on some of this farm equipment.
Well, not only that, you have life and limb safety,
fully automated.
Right? You've got people working around a lot of this equipment, so you do have to consider the safety of people and their ability to operate while the equipment's being used in the field, like potatoes and stuff like there, or hay even. There's people that are on the machines, they're doing stuff next to the machines, they're in the field working around the machines. So those are all important aspects that need to be considered from a safety standpoint.
Yeah, and the other thing is, with cars designed for the road, there's regulations. You can't, or at least in most places, you can't have fully autonomous cars yet. And it's a lot more nuanced. But when you're on a private farm, on private land, you can do whatever the heck you want. That device can be fully autonomous, and a lot of these are designed to be these days.
Yeah, 100%. The ability for the disruption to happen on these tractors, again, is terrifying from not only safety and monetary, but you start to think about the wide-scale distribution of where these tractors actually are, how that affects our food and supply chain. And then once we get to the point where we have to start evaluating the security of this, like what is the regulatory and who covers the cost of that? The farmers aren't going to be able to offset that. John Deere is certainly probably not going to be dealing with that. So where does the regulation fall for ensuring that these are safety and security? This becomes a critical infrastructure issue, and so does this end up falling under CISA as one more avenue to tackle in an overutilized department? Like, how do we address this before it becomes an issue?
From a regulatory perspective, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what branch that would fall under. Be agriculture,
USDA,
right? Yeah.
So now USDA has to become cyber proficient and do audits of tractors and farm operations from a cybersecurity standpoint, and ensure that the communications and protocols are all secure. Like, we're a long ways off from that, but we're already at a point where that needs to happen.
Or at least have really solid partnerships with the more cyber focused branches of government, like DHS and CISA, right?
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think people need to kind of get involved. This seems like a great project and side thing. If you live in a rural area, this is a great place to kind of tackle a technology issue that has security and cyber focus, as well as implications that go into other areas such as critical infrastructure, or even getting into car hacking. A lot of the CAN bus and low-high concepts and hardware hacking and oscilloscope and JTAG and SPI, UART, all of the form factors and protocols and interfaces that you have to interact with are all going to be very similar. So if there's a place that you can interact with this in a rural setting, this is a fantastic way to kind of get involved and help out and learn a little bit.
Yeah, and another thing you might not think of too much, we're talking about tractors, but a ton of data is collected out of these things, and some of that data is used for calculating, any rebates you might get, or carbon credits, or subsidies. A lot of the data coming off these, this equipment is used for stuff like that. So, anything that allows you to wipe that data, maybe hold it for ransom. There lots of opportunities here to really ground a farm, or hold up a farm, or even brick some of these devices. That could and especially like the moment he mentioned that all these tractors, and John Deere is an American company, but very much a global operation. Farms all over the world are dependent on these things. And a single control point, say what? Like, that's not a thing that you want to hear. You don't want to hear that, globally, farms are dependent on these machines that are all connected to a single operation center. You look at security.
2021 revenue for John Deere was $45 billion. Mm-hmm. This is not a small global operation.
No, not at all. And so they've got all kinds of portals. They've got I've mentioned the operations center. John Deere Connected Support is what they call the center that has remote access to the tractor. So if you need something troubleshooted, or if you just rebooted your tractor too many times and need it unlocked, these are the people that you're going to call to do that. Service for that is like $150 an hour on top of the $10,000 per year plus that you're paying for subscriptions for being able to use different apps and functionality on the tractors themselves.
Annual maintenance agreement has to be up to date for that support.
Mm-hmm. Another thing he found is that there was a service admin portal, and all you needed for that was a serial number. You could just plug in a serial number and get full information of any owners of tractors. So basically doxed all the tractor owners, and this was written up. This happened I think a year ago, something like that. He found all this, it's just basic mistakes you would expect any company with no real security expertise to make when designing products and making web-based portals and stuff like that. And it's depressing to see that kind of stuff, in this decade, outside of the 1990s and early 2000s, which is when most of that should have, was in public knowledge and should have started to get cleaned up. Certainly shouldn't have. We shouldn't be using MAC addresses and serial numbers for authentication, in any product that's new, that's built in any kind of modern times.
Yeah, speaking of passwordless, you don't need a password. You just need a serial address and MAC address, not the passwordless.
It's a very different kind of passwordless. Yeah. Case IH is another company that he's done some research on, competitor to John Deere, also makes farming equipment that he found some vulnerabilities in. One of the ways he was able to get access to this stuff is he found I think it was some kind of private key to their Okta IDP, to their authentication gateway, that allowed him to basically log in as any other user in the organization. So yeah, some basic stuff. And then the tractors themselves, some of the older ones ran on Windows CE. These computers that basically run everything and are connected, do the data capture, have the 4G modems and the Wi-Fi radios and all that stuff. But now they run Yocto Linux, some flavor of Linux called Yocto Linux, and pretty
it also
basic.
Makes you wonder about some of the vulnerabilities in like sudo and a lot of the other Linux local privilege escalation and vulnerabilities we've seen over the years. Are these kernels being patched? Are they staying up to date? Kind of some interesting thoughts as well.
So good question. When he bought one of these off of eBay, he basically just browsed the file system, found the Yum repo, and pulled down all the firmware and the RPMs off the Yum repo and started sifting through that stuff. So some crazy stuff going on here. I think that about comes to the end of the stuff that we had discussed privately before he was going to come on the show. And definitely go check out his DEF CON talk. I didn't figure out exactly when the talk was, but he did mention it's on the main stage, and he's gonna have some stuff with him. It's gonna be a show and tell, and it's gonna be pretty interesting.
I'm excited for that one, honestly. Not
Me
that
too.
I play with tractors a lot.
No, and he doesn't either. I mean, he's literally just grabbing this stuff off of eBay. Like, he doesn't have any kind of background with tractors. And, somebody mentioned, hey, this doesn't look like it's getting a whole lot of attention, and looks like there's maybe, there's potentially some issues here. I think farmers were already hacking their tractors and stuff like that. So Paul Roberts had the forethought to say, hey, this could be a some rich soil for growing some research, to use a farming metaphor. And absolutely it was. So
the repair ban that is happening with farmers right now against their John Deere tractors is a pretty big thing, especially I guess more Midwest and this side of the state where we have a ton of tractors. So you kind of have to be a little careful on your research and like how you're doing things, because it does affect the farmers. John Deere is very sue happy. They do like to send a lot of cease and desist, so maintaining some OPSEC and really being careful who you're working with. That being said, there's a bunch of research out of California PolySciTech releasing open source projects that goes through a lot of the CAN protocol, what the memory address and locations are, what the signals are, how to interact and get started with some of the tractor stuff. So we posted some stuff in the Discord, but just know that as you're looking into some of this and doing some of the research, know your audience, know your personal risk liability and how to offset that. Pseudonyms, maintaining some anonymity, and really having a good lawyer to speak to when you are going to be releasing stuff, because you can get in a substantial amount of trouble and legally be held liable by a company that has some pretty good lawyers. So.
Yeah, and he did mention the kind of the ethical quandary that you have there, because while the vulnerabilities he's finding are going to protect the products, but since the farmers don't own the products, does that mean he's benefiting the farmers here, or John Deere's business model? Right. Yeah.
That's the debate that at some point I imagine will come to fruition inside of a court, and that may be location based state to state and jurisdiction based, state to state, because there is a pretty big debate around like who owns the hardware and is the software and hardware separate. And I think some of the Tesla outcome may play into this to John Deere's benefit. So it is getting very interesting from that standpoint.
Yeah, like the whether or not the $8,000, $10,000 you pay for auto drive is transferable, right?
Yep. Or the hardware itself. Like if you're spending, a $500,000, $300,000, even $100,000 on the tractor, that tractor hardware, if it works mechanically, are you able to maintain and own that hardware outside of the software? And if you do maintain and own the hardware, does the ECU count, and can you flash something different to that? That's been a conundrum for, even before Tesla. You look at some of the ECU hacking for chip upgrades for things like diesel trucks. Bully Dog was a great example. They're actually a local company here, and they're global now. They reverse engineered, had to crack and find MD hash collisions inside the ECU to decrypt some of the ECU portions, and they spent their own time, research, and money to do that. So does that mean that once they're able to do that, is that legal? So far, that has been a yes, but with the Tesla stuff and a lot of the stuff coming out of this, there's some untouched ground of legislation that I imagine will come out around hardware and the software that operates on that hardware.
Well, I mean, consider the economics.
We've got phones too, like you had phones and computers. If we get to the point where you don't own the hardware.
Yeah, so where I was going with that is, if there's a market, if there's enough people, wanting to keep using an unsupported wireless access point, it gave rise to DDWRT and Tomato OS, things like that. And a lot of that was just people wanting additional features, that weren't supported in the products. But one of the byproducts is you can continue using that hardware until it actually, dies and gets too old. And phones as well. So a lot of phones, the planned obsolescence on your average Android phone, you're maybe getting 18 months to 24 months of software updates on an Android phone, and then it's an insecure brick after that. Like you can keep using it, but do you want to keep using it without security updates? So we have things like lineage, and now with laptops, even Chrome. Chrome acquired the company that was making Chrome OS more compatible, or Chromium OS more compatible with other types of hardware, and they brought that in-house. And there's now you can deploy Chrome on all kinds of old laptops and still have a fairly performant laptop that's maybe 10, 12 years old.
I think that's great. We really do need that with all the e-waste and how fast we're seeing devices go obsolete. You're ending up with piles of electronic e-waste that could be leveraged by kids, underprivileged after-school learning programs, daycares, places that really are not going to have the funding or go out of their way to get things additional for technology. But we have great pieces of hardware that don't need to be obsoleted and thrown into a land waste this early, or even sending them overseas. Like it would be great to see things like the Hackers for Charity thing, where we're sending some of these devices, and it is economically making sense to do that.
Yeah, one laptop per child, but that was designed from the ground up to be an inexpensive laptop that could be used in countries where electricity is spotty and things like that. But yeah, it's those folks, it's schools, and it's farmers that end up getting screwed here. With these business models, with planned obsolescence, or as he put it, as Sick Codes put it, forced obsolescence is really what we're talking about.
I like that.
Yeah. All right, I think that's a good place to wrap this conversation. We'll take a little break here and be back with the Enterprise Security Weekly News here in just a few minutes.